Hi, this is Dave Hurwitz at ClassicsToday.com. As you can see, I'm wearing a tie. That means we must be talking about Beethoven's Ninth. You cannot speak about the most sublime, exalted piece of music in all of German symphonism unless you're appropriately dressed for the occasion. So here we have the tie. Now, in order to talk about the Ninth, I think we need to set some parameters because it's been recorded so many times now and it's almost ceased to be the event that it really ought to be, I think. First of all, this is a dogmatic statement. Some will disagree. There is no great recording of the Ninth on period instruments. None. The symphony simply does not work, at least as they're played today. It could be that future performances will come to grips with the music with a little bit more, shall we say, idiomatic flair. But so far, none of the period instrument bands that have attempted it have succeeded. Now, there are some people who use period instrument style, shall we say, historically informed performance practice, hip-hop, and they attempt to do it that way. People such as Charles Mackerras, Nicholas Harnoncourt, the new, Pavel Järvi on chamber orchestra, which is actually a very good performance. And those are much better. And some of those are certainly worth considering, but I wouldn't rank them with the best. You see, the Ninth Symphony in some ways was ahead of its time. It's a work that sounds better, let's put it this way, if it's done in the modern style than it ever will when done in period style. Again, this is my opinion. This is how I feel about it. But I think that you can demonstrate it in a few ways. I mean, for example, if you take Beethoven's metronome marks seriously, which is never a very good idea, by the way, you're going to wind up with a symphony in which the scherzo, especially if you take all the repeats, is substantially longer than the adagio. And so the balance of tempi and the balance of tension and relaxation, in my view, is totally out of whack. This doesn't mean that the adagio has to last 20 minutes, as it does sometimes with people like Furtwängler or even Schulte. You can get away with it in a little bit more than 12, which is what most period instrument performances take, 12 to 13. One of the best, in fact, was Otto Klemperer, believe it or not, known for his slow tempi, but not in slow movements. His adagio is about 15 minutes long, which seems to me just about perfect. So, there are different ways to do it, but the bottom line is that you have to go with how the music feels. And when the adagio is taken at that tempo, the quicker variations, which have subdivided beats, are simply unplayable by the violins. That doesn't mean they can't get through the notes. They do get through the notes. But can they shape them? Can they make them sing expressively the way Beethoven intended? So far, none of them have, at least not to my satisfaction. The same thing happens at the very end of the symphony, where, the final apostrophe to the daughter of Elysium, Freude, schöne Tochter aus Elysium, is supposed to be slower, and the strings have to articulate their runs, that sweeping, majestic sound, as the chorus is singing and the strings are doing their scale things, and it's just glorious. Well, if you follow the metronome markings, then what happens is that section is actually faster than the prestissimo coda. And for me anyway, it sounds kind of ridiculous. Now, there are some conductors who have taken it rather rapidly, even historically. Erich Leinsdorf did, Bruno Walter did. They don't slow down that much, but you have to capture the majestic quality of the music, especially in the chorus's final giant apotheosis. And the period instrument people, who I think take these things over literally, simply give that up. Now, they may be right to do it because they're using small bands and smaller forces, and it may be that trying to give the music the size and majesty that it might otherwise have is inappropriate to the ensembles that they think are best. I don't know. I just think it sounds like crap, and if it sounds like crap, I don't want to hear it. So let's talk about great recordings of the Ninth, of which there are quite a few. There are three that I think are really, truly outstanding, and they may surprise you. At least one of them may, I think. But the first is a very well-known recording, and it's a personal favorite, and it always has been. This is the Ferenc Fricsay, It's just a beautiful recording with the Berlin Philharmonic. It was Deutsche Grammophon's first stereo ninth, and it still sounds wonderful. Fritzsche was such a great conductor. Like Sándor Vég, who I talked about in these videos in Mozart, something about Hungarian conductors. They have a certain ability to sing and phrase the music with a warmth and a humanity that's very, very special. I don't quite understand how they do it or where it comes from, but Fritzsche had that too. He had that quality, and you hear that quality throughout this performance. It's exciting, it's very well sung, it has a singing adagio that's just almost unparalleled in my view. And I think that considering its age, it's one hell of a fine performance. It's held up very well, and it comes with the Egmont Overture too, which is really nice. The second recording is this one, Karl Böhm's first for DG. He did it twice. The second one he did when he was very old, and it is quite literally a near-death experience. It is slow and heavy and ponderous, and you really don't want to try that one. It takes forever. It's sad, really, because Böhm, for all of his reputation sometimes as a stodgy Kapellmeister, was really an exciting conductor, particularly in the theater. I mean, remember his Tristan and Isolde with Birgit Nilsson, which is thrilling and one of the fastest out there. He could be absolutely scorchingly exciting live. In the studio, he was more controlled. But this ninth, with the Vienna Philharmonic and a very good cast of soloists, who was it's Gwyneth Jones, Tatiana Troyanos, Jess Thomas, and Carl Ritterbusch, it really, really has that quality and intensity that Böhm gave to his live performances. It's beautifully played and beautifully sung. So you really ought to consider it if you have a chance to hear it, because it will surprise you. I guarantee it will surprise you, especially the ending, which is really thrilling. You won't think that he's going to go off to the races in that final prestissimo, but he does, and the result is wonderful. Finally, there's the version that I think is probably the best modern version out there. That's this one, Gunther Wand with the NDR Orchestra, the NDR Symphony Orchestra from Hamburg. Wand was one of those, he used to call himself an old conductor of the new school, and he was, but in one respect, he was a little bit old school, and that was this. He only made one Beethoven cycle. There are a couple other performances of some of the other symphonies, but there is one complete Beethoven cycle. He did not toss off Beethoven as though it were just some other concert event, and then next week he would go and do it again, which he actually did with Bruckner. He told a friend of mine who was interviewing him that RCA wanted him to remake the ninth, but he refused. And the reason he refused, he said, is because I can't do it any better. That performance went as perfectly as it could go. And it does. I think it probably has the best finale on disc. The interpretation is absolutely organic from first note to last, and the sonics are fantastic. It's magnificently well recorded, and you really aren't going to do better. So it also comes, obviously, in the Beethoven cycle, which RCA has reissued at budget price, and it's one of the great Beethoven cycles in general. It's really, really worth having. So if you don't have the cycle, and you just want to get a ninth, then Gunther Wand's Beethoven ninth is, from my way of thinking, the best modern version. Actually, I'm not the only one, because some of my colleagues have done, blind listening sessions and things like that. And especially my colleague Christophe Huss, who's the music critic for Le Devoir in Montreal, was the editor of Repertoire magazine in France, and they would do these discography listening sessions. And the recordings of the ninth that they recommended above all others were the Böhm and the Wand. There's actually some, so I wouldn't call that just, two mentions a consensus, but there's the potential of a consensus. Now, there are other wonderful recordings of the ninth out there, and you might like them for various reasons. Karajan always did a very good ninth, except that he hated singers. And so, the chorus is in some other country while he's doing it. It's kind of a pity. But if you go for Karajan, his 1977 version is the best of those. There's Furtwängler. Oh dear, Furtwängler, right? Furtwängler. The one that everyone is supposed to like is the Nazi Ninth, the one with, Hitler and Goebbels or whoever it was in the audience, which sounds absolutely horrible. It's unlistenable. It sounds like a temper tantrum by a cymbal player. The balances are out of whack. The orchestral playing is horrible. The next one he did, the Bayreuth one, it was the official one that was released by EMI. It's got all kinds of slovenly playing and diffuse sonics. The best Furtwängler performance is the one with the Philharmonia Orchestra from the Lucerne Festival. It was the last one he did just shortly before his death, and he finally had an orchestra that could actually play, and that he didn't have to work too hard to keep together, because Furtwängler, for all of his genius, and he was, his conception of the music sometimes was pure genius. It was a slob. He had technical difficulties all the time. You could never count on him to deliver the goods in terms of just clean, decent playing. And that matters. People say, oh, well, these little imperfections don't matter because, it was the concept that matters. Well, I'm sorry. He was a professional. He was a conductor. That was his job. It was his job to deliver the concept correctly, to deliver it in the best possible way. And the fact that he didn't or couldn't is a defect, plain and simple. You may not care. I care. I care a lot. So those are your options, I think. Your best bets are Frickschei, Karl Böhm, and above all, Gunther Wand. If you don't know the Gunther Wand, you really owe it to yourself to hear it. He was a brilliant conductor. It's not the most famous. He wasn't the most flashy, but this performance is the most musical, the most humane, and also the best recorded of all the modern recordings of Beethoven's Ninth. So thank you, and now I can take my tie off. Keep on listening, folks. Bye-bye.